My name is Owen Symes, and welcome to The Copagandists, a podcast about cop shows and the people who make them. Last week, we talked about Jack Webb's early career in radio, his interest in creating a show based on the LAPD, and that department's controversial image coming into the 1950s. This time, we're going to cover Dragnet as it aired over the radio, and we'll start with talking about how the production team crafted a quote-unquote authentic show. When we left off, Webb still needed to obtain the LAPD's cooperation. These days, they work with a whole host of productions of all sorts, but back then such cooperation wasn't so common. In the context of the media environment of the time, where the police were often sidelined or maligned, the controversies the LAPD had been involved in during that same period, and the precarity of Chief Clements Horrell himself, this hesitancy was understandable. To secure this cooperation, Sergeant Marty Wynn first requested an audience with LAPD Deputy Chief Joseph Reed. He agreed to meet, and so around April 1949, the team nervously presented the deputy chief with a recording of what they had so far, a prologue and some sample dialogue. Although he seemed disinterested during the presentation, Reed ultimately said the boys were on the right track, and gave them the go-ahead to continue. Chief Horrell would later give his blessing as well, telling Webb, "You're on the right track. You don't make heroes of the cops, and you're reflecting the day-to-day drudgery of police work." Although the LAPD gave its blessing, it did also formulate a few stipulations for their continued cooperation. As summarized by True Detective magazine, these were: 1. Only actual cases can be used, and these must be presented factually. All cases must be adjudicated, that is, they must have been brought to trial and the defendants must have received judgment. 2. The police department must be presented as it actually operates, not in a more glamorous light. 3. 2 specially appointed police advisors must clear all technical details. 4. All scripts must be passed by the city attorney. Now, some things to put in your back pocket, which we'll return to in subsequent episodes. First, because the show would be limited only to solved cases that went all the way from arrest to trial and conviction, this meant that only LAPD success stories would be broadcast, so no cold cases, no stumped detectives, no inaction here. Second, these unglamorous police operations would only be based on the records and recollections of the cops themselves, prioritizing the official narrative of events while leaving victims, witnesses, and alleged perpetrators without a voice. Finally, note the presence of official censors at various levels of the production process: the city attorney at the script level, and the police officers, so-called advisors, on set. With this cooperation obtained and NBC on board to broadcast, Webb and Moyer got to work researching the intricacies of the LAPD and hammering out scripts. As a critic would subsequently effuse, "Dragnet seems effortless and natural, an effect created by hours of research and careful writing." This is also an effect I hope to convey on this show. Now, Webb's research has become the stuff of Hollywood legend. Webb and co. spent a week touring the police headquarters, including visiting all the departments. They attended all the police academy classes then offered. They absorbed explanations for the workings of all police equipment. According to a 1950 write-up of the show in True Detective magazine, this ranged, quote, "from the IBM machines employed in statistical work," I can't say that word, "employed in statistical work, to the Thompson submachine guns, which are used when extremely direct and positive action is demanded." That's a hell of a way to describe violence done by the state, but okay. Producer William Rousseau told that same magazine, quote, "Our team has spent many hours conversing with and observing police detectives. They've discarded any previous conceived notions about how police should speak and act. Instead, they present the police detective as a hard-working, highly trained specialist who captures lawbreakers by working with the team rather than through individual flashes of genius. Now, that is a key difference that we have to remember between classic detectives, whether it's the Philip Marlowe's or the Sherlock Holmes, and this new iteration of procedural. It's about the team, it's about the process, it's about the system. It's not about individual scientific genius or street smarts. Such authenticity had often been controversial in Hollywood, with critics asserting that presenting criminal activity in a realistic fashion might give people ideas, might inspire them to try it themselves. But Sergeant Wynn assured the press at the time that this would not be the case on Dragnet. Quote, "The police and not the criminals are followed in the cases we choose. In presenting them, no reference is ever made to the methods of operation unknown to criminals." This authenticity came to listeners thanks to the work of sound technicians who, under Webb's direction, orchestrated a sonic environment that emphasized minimalism, restraint, and deliberation. The music did not overwhelm, the voices did not bellow, the sound effects did not deafen. The voice acting in particular came in for contemporary comment. The actors intentionally underplayed their roles, bucking industry convention, which emphasized variety in vocal performances, to aid listeners in distinguishing between characters. You know, the kind of expert vocal performance that I provide whenever I give quotes. By having the actors underplay their roles, Webb sought to avoid the vocal stereotypes that had become so common in radio crime shows by that point. This differentiated his program from contemporaries like Gangbusters. Joe Beck, writing for True Detective magazine, praised this monotone style of acting. Quote, "Instead of whooping up the characterizations, getting excited about everything, and giving the impression that they're playing fictional stuff, the makers of Dragnet are casual, matter-of-fact, and consequently convincing." The dialogue delivered by these subdued performances was filled not with hard-boiled cliches, but actual police jargon, used liberally and without explanation. The collection of this jargon began early in the research process. While doing ride-alongs with Wynn, asking how cops frisked suspects or kicked in doors, that kind of thing, Webb asked the officer to talk like a cop. Wynn, according to a Time article, kind of bristled at this, responding that cops don't talk any different than you do. Webb tried to be more specific. "Well, what would you do if you had a suspect?" To which Wynn replied, "Why, I'd go down to R&R and pull the package." At this point, Webb grew animated. "That's what I mean." And they were off to the races. Inside the recording booth, Webb and his team worked for some sort of realism. As recalled by a member of the recording crew, one of the key things was that we should stand back and not be speaking right into the microphone. Webb would have an engineer throw the pot, that is to say the master volume control, all the way open, so that we'd pick up sound out on the street. Not loud, but you'd pick up sirens and that sort of thing. Jack wanted that. He said that when you're in a room with somebody, it isn't all silent. You hear all kinds of background noise. He wanted that ambience. Out in the wide world, the sound technicians made use of newly available tape recorders, foregoing reliance on stock sound effects already available at NBC, preferring instead to record their own stuff. As one paper reported, "All the sound effects on NBC's new thriller series Dragnet are special ones. The NBC production crew took a trek down to LA Police GHQ and tape recorded all the effects they needed." The New York Times gave even more detail. "If a script called for a gun battle on a roof, two men with guns would get to the top of one of Los Angeles' buildings and shoot it out for the benefit of the tape recorder and startled pedestrians below. If a telephone conversation was to be overheard, they would plug into an actual telephone circuit set up specifically for them." The show's use of geography also reinforced this realism at every turn. Literally. Much of Friday's narration informs the listener about where they're going, what street they're on, which direction they're turning. Like a dramatic GPS. Their destinations were more varied than the typical cop show of the time as well, expanding beyond the precinct houses and nightclubs to include the lived-in noise and bustle of working-class neighborhoods, hospitals, and the interrogation room, anywhere that victims, witnesses, and suspects might be questioned. Producer William Rousseau summed up all these innovations in early 1950. I feel that we are trailblazing in a technique that has been neglected in dramatic radio. That is, the terse, documentary-type presentation of actual, true-to-life stories. So that's the behind the scenes. What happened when the show actually hit the airwaves? Well, reports that Webb was involved in a news show began circulating by the spring of 1949. Remember, he'd already been somewhat famous for Pat Novak for Hire, so it was a bit of news that he was working on something new. A Syracuse, New York paper reported Dragnet, a dramatic series based on records of the Los Angeles Police Department, will take the 10 to 10:30 slot on NBC and WSYR Fridays. The programs will highlight the crime-smashing activities of two detectives, Sergeant Joe Friday, portrayed by Jack Webb, and Sergeant Ben Romero, played by Barton Yarborough. So the basic structure of the show would thus revolve around Webb and his partner, usually Yarborough's Sergeant Romero. They would solve cases of various types, everything from fraud and burglary up to homicide. The emphasis would be on process, teamwork, and drudgery. These newspaper notices constantly mentioned the fact that the show drew from authentic LAPD case files, and PR did likewise. Take a November 1949 newspaper photo, for instance, where Webb and the rest of the cast are shown, quote, authentic. The cast of NBC's Dragnet series listened to the sound effects recently recorded for the show at the central office of the LA Police Department. That same month, another paper ran a picture with the caption, Research for Realism. Jack Webb, left, and Barton Yarborough, stars of Dragnet, NBC's police drama series, are shown checking through the files of the LA Police Department. The programs are based on actual police cases. Now, initial expectations were not especially high for this new show. Take radio critic Bill Bird, who pointed out that, quote, if you listen in, you'll find that it's none other than a revival of the old Calling All Cars series, which years ago commanded the listening attention of an estimated 90-odd% of the dialers up and down the California coast. This critic presumed that, quote, it would be the same under a different title and with a different writing and production staff. Just kind of dismissing it as, we've already done this in the 1930s, it's just a remake, a rehash. Now, speaking of Calling All Cars, we might ask at this point, how did they even land on the title Dragnet? Well, when discussing what to call it, Webb and Wynn considered a number of alternatives. One option was The Cop, which they ultimately rejected because the LAPD brass considered the word cop to be derogatory towards police. They also considered The Sergeant, but discarded it on account of it sounding too militaristic. Finally, they considered just calling it Calling All Cars, harkening back to that prior show. This option certainly had a dramatic ring to it, but it also had a problem. It was a pseudo-police term. It was not official jargon. Well, what did the police actually say when they wanted to swarm an area with cars and officers? Bingo, Dragnet. Anyway, the first episode aired on Friday, June 3rd, 1949, at 10 p.m., and covered the apprehension of a thief who'd stolen $10,000, a little over $133,000 today.
What you are about to hear is true. Only the names have been changed to protect the innocent.
Dragnet. Dragnet, the documented drama of an actual crime, investigated and solved by the men who unrelentingly stand watch on the security of your home, your family, and your life. For the next 30 minutes, in cooperation with the Los Angeles Police Department, you will travel step by step on the side of...
The only violence was a brief fight between the perpetrator and Joe Friday, a bit of scuffle and punch, and then it was over. No guns need apply. After the episode, NBC worriedly provided feedback. Speed it up. Let's have some action. Get some actors who can act. Webb obliged, and the second episode included a flashback sequence where a holdup man kills a civilian while committing a robbery.
It was Tuesday, March 25th. It was cold in Los Angeles. We were working the night watch out of homicide. Detectives in Los Angeles work in pairs. My partner's Ben Romero. He's a sergeant, so am I. My name's Friday. The boss is Ed Backstrand, chief of detectives. I was on the way back from the record bureau, and it was 13 minutes past 11 when I got to room 42. Homicide.
That's a hot shot. Somebody grab it.
I got it, Ed.
At 1245 East O'Haney Street,
1, 2, 4,
2
5.
officers shot. At 1245 East O'Haney Street,
O'Haney Street.
2 officers.
Shot.
What have you got, Friday?
Read it.
2 officers shot. Where's Romero?
Right here, Skipper.
Okay, you've got one to roll on. Get going.
Now it was the LAPD's turn to worry. Would this show devolve into a typical shoot-'em-up actioner? Now, Webb assured them this would not be the case, that this kind of violence would not be the norm. And I can sympathize with Webb here. Trying to please 2 masters is not easy. For the third episode, Webb added 2 new elements to the formula. The iconic theme music, the so-called Dragnet March, written by Walter Schumann, although it was found in court to have been pulled from Miklos Rosa's 1946 work on The Killers, so going forward, Schumann and Rosa would share credit. In addition to this new music, Webb also added a brand new introduction to the show, putting the listener right there next to the police protagonist. Undeniably, this opening makes a compelling pitch even 80 years later.
Ladies and gentlemen, the story you are about to hear is true. Only the names have been changed to protect the innocent.
NBC brings you Dragnet.
You're a detective sergeant. You're assigned to robbery detail. There's a potential killer on the loose in your city. 18 women have been beaten and robbed by this man. The newspapers call him the Werewolf. Your job is to get him.
Dragnet, the documented drama of an actual crime, investigated and solved by the men who unrelentingly stand watch on the security of your home, your family, and your life. For the next 30 minutes, in cooperation with the Los Angeles Police Department, you will travel step by step on the side of the law through an actual case from official police files from beginning to end, from crime to punishment. Dragnet is the story of your police force in action.
Reportedly, these early scripts were not penned by Webb's longtime collaborator Jim Moser, but rather someone else, who, maddeningly from my perspective, is not named in any of the write-ups I've come across. Unsatisfied with the results, Webb jettisoned this other guy and turned to Jim Moser exclusively going forward. In addition to working out the music and pace of the show, and figuring out who was actually going to write them, these early episodes also saw the process of script authorization hammered out. Early on, Wynn and 2 other officers, Donahue and Brasher, worked to ensure accuracy. While Webb and Moser had worked diligently to craft episodes that adhered closely to their observations of police conduct and their readings of police files, the technical advisors did find things they thought worthy of amendment, particularly when it came to language. Captain Donahue recalled, "Changes were mostly expression, a word here or there. Sometimes the procedure was wrong." Officer Brasher, however, was a little more frank, hinting that it did take some time for the police and the creatives to push in the same direction. Quote, "The first year was pretty rough. We didn't know what they wanted. They didn't know what we wanted." Outside of the creative teething problems, Webb had to deal with some back-end drama as well. When he had first formulated the show, he'd been intimidated by the prospect of producing, directing, and acting all at the same time. And his agent, George Rosenberg, agreed to handle much of the production work himself. but he also put his own name on the show as owner. Success made this arrangement untenable, and so the two bickered. Ultimately, Webb got ownership of the show, with Rosenberg agreeing to a percentage of the profits for the duration of its broadcast. Ratings for the first few episodes were not stellar, and obviously feedback from Webb's bosses pulled in different directions, but early critics did take notice. Maggie Adams of the Cincinnati Enquirer had high praise for the show's premiere, NBC's internal criticism notwithstanding, which she considered utterly different from the standard radio crime show of the day. Simply as entertainment, the dogged pursuit of payroll robbers held interest taut for a half hour. Even better, the core of interest was hard, intelligent police work, including, Private Eyes, please note, a case that would stand up in court. She admitted that this more realistic show probably still took some liberties with the facts, but nonetheless thought that certainly the tone of Dragnet is a breath of fresh air after the glamorized sewage that smells up too many crime shows. A few days later, syndicated columnist John Crosby wrote glowingly that Dragnet is an astonishing cops and robbers job simply because nothing very astonishing happens on it. It rings with an authenticity that I found absorbing, though confirmed mystery addicts may find it just dull. He ends his review by noting, quite a few crime shows now claim to be based on somebody or other's files. Few of them sound as authentic as Dragnet. This praise continued throughout the summer. The Buffalo Evening News added that the authenticity of the methods used by detectives in actually tracking down criminals makes this show one of the outstanding crime busters of the air. The glamour of the usual Private Eye is played down here, and the dogged routine necessary in real life to expose criminals is shown as it is. One paper summarized the show's growing notoriety at the end of June. Kudos also in order for the very fine NBC thriller series Dragnet. Rave reviews from the trades and listeners testify to Jack Webb's effective police characterizations. The cases are really true, too, right from LA police files. This critical attention, combined with improving ratings, prompted NBC to extend their commitment another 4 weeks. Remember, initially they had agreed to produce the show for only 4 weeks, with the stipulation that after that point, they would have to find a sponsor in order to keep being broadcast. They also moved it to a slightly better time slot, Thursdays at 10:30. As ratings continued to climb, and fan mail beginning to come in as well, NBC gave Dragnet a third extension and moved it to Saturday night. By the end of the summer, the show actually achieved the highest ratings of any NBC program, which attracted a sponsor, tobacco giant Liggett & Myers, whose Fatima and Chesterfield cigarettes soon became a regular part of the show.
Now, here are authentic reports from all over the country that tell the story of Fatima's sensational increase in popularity. New York Division.
Fatima sales up 132%.
Chicago Division.
Fatima sales up 453%.
Los Angeles Division.
Fatima sales up 545%.
More and more smokers agree Fatima is the best of all long cigarettes. So enjoy Fatima yourself and give extra mild Fatimas for Christmas in the attractive golden yellow carton. Everyone who smokes Fatima says that this great new long cigarette is the best of all long cigarettes.
By year's end, Dragnet was consistently in the top 10 of the Hooper ratings, which measured radio listenership nationally. Now, criticism was not common early on, but it certainly existed. For instance, columnists Stuart and Jane Heineman had a particular complaint in late 1950. Quote, "Beefs, that Rousseau, director of Dragnet, is so fascinated with sound effects, showering, shaving, washing hands, that the plot is almost forgotten. And speak up just a little, Jack Webb. Sometimes the role is so underplayed, it sounds like it's played underwater." Outside of the radio critics, another early detractor was actually the National Rifle Association, who objected strenuously to the show's first Christmas episode, 22 caliber rifle for Christmas. which was basically a PSA discussing the dangers of giving a firearm to a young child as a present. The episode hinges on the accidental death of a young boy. It ends with the tearful father of the victim offering to gift his son's presents to another child. After the civilians depart, Sergeant Ben Romero asks Joe Friday a poignant question.
Well, what does it all prove, Joe? You don't give a kid a gun for Christmas.
The story you have just heard was true. Only the names were changed to protect the innocent.
On December 24th, 1948, a coroner's inquest was held in the county morgue, city and county of Los Angeles, state of California. In a moment, the results of that inquest. At the coroner's inquest, it was officially recorded that Stephen Morheim's death was the result of an accident. Stanley Johnstone, age 9, was absolved of any legal responsibility for his friend's death. You have just heard Dragnet, a new series of authentic cases from official files. Technical advice for...
NBC received thousands of complaint letters about this episode, along with an official complaint from the NRA itself. The LAPD responded to this criticism with vocal support, cops being, I guess, understandably partial to disarming the very people they seek to control. The department also promised a whole series of such episodes in the future, a big fuck you to the NRA. Ultimately, Webb and Dragnet would take the easier route and just rebroadcast this controversial episode for the next couple of Christmases. The strength of the LAPD's response to this complaint evinces that not only were audiences and critics impressed with the show, so too were the cops. Little wonder that its no-nonsense pro-cop storylines were received warmly by the LAPD, but this police appreciation spread as the show's reputation for quote-unquote real police stories widened. Doubly so after episodes began devoting some airtime to calling out the good deeds and darings due of real cops all over the country, something that was actually a suggestion of the sponsor, Leggett & Myers. One episode from September 1949 called out the service of a Texas officer.
The program is dedicated to motorcycle patrolman John Kramer of the El Paso, Texas Sheriff's Department, who on the afternoon of April 26, 1940, gave his life so that yours might be more secure.
Webb was happy to oblige in assisting the cops get the good word out, telling one paper in December of 1949, "Regular police officers get so little recognition for the wonderful job they do. Through the stories we dramatize on Dragnet, we can point a little credit towards the fine body of public servants who quietly protect our homes and property." Such praise, however, did not apparently shield Webb from having the law enforced on his own person. According to a Saturday Evening Post article, Webb was pulled over in 1950 for running an LA traffic light. When the cop realized who he'd pulled over, he advised that Joe Friday would never do such a thing, and then proceeded to give Webb a ticket. Now, I'm kind of left wondering if the cop was really so gung-ho here, or if Webb ensured he got the ticket so that it would not appear the LAPD was showing favoritism. I mean, Webb could afford it by this point. He was very successful. By this point, in late 1950, William Parker had been appointed chief of the LAPD, right in the middle of this initial buildup of Dragnet's notoriety. Thankful that he now had a new public relations ally on his hands, Chief Parker quickly gave official thanks to the show, awarding it a certificate for presenting, quote, an honest, faithful, and official portrayal of police officers in action. This was presented to Webb in October of that year. As it happened, Parker presented this award 2 days after news broke that a police reservist had shot and killed an 18-year-old college student, an incident which Parker pledged fully to investigate. As this latest scandal played out in the papers, Dragnet continued to churn out well-received episodes, and things were looking up. The show was a hit with audiences, a darling among critics, and a propaganda coup for the LAPD. There was just one problem. It was on radio, the pre-war medium, the medium of yesterday. Television, that was the medium of the future. For Dragnet truly to make its mark on the culture, it would need to migrate. And so shall we. Next week. Thanks for listening to this week's episode. Sources are in the show notes, as always. You can find an essay version of this script, complete with detailed citations, on my Substack, substack.com/OwenSimes. Find me at Blue Sky, Owen-Symes, YouTube, Integral History, and my book, He Was Our Man in Washington, History of the Obama Years. Music by Carl Casey at White Bat Audio. See you next time.